Greetings, folks. Seeing 12:30 p.m. Central Time, so we're going to go ahead and get started for today. Welcome back. We have passed the halfway point for our training, and we're so glad that you're all back with us for another day. To start us out today, we'd like to just take a quick minute to elevate any questions you might have. This could be questions for us. This could be questions that you're mulling over and want to discuss with your team. This could be rhetorical questions that may not have an answer right now. Regardless of where your questions are stemming from, we want to hear from them. So let's just take a quick moment to share any questions or thoughts that you have. Please feel empowered to share your thoughts in the chat or unmute yourself for a moment. But we're gonna take a quick moment to just see what's out there. Alrighty, not seeing any questions just yet, but if you feel moved to share your thoughts, just feel free to utilize the chat and we can move forward for the day. So moving on to day 3, we will continue our deep dive into modules 3 and 4 and the conclusion. We will be spending more time in our breakout sessions connecting and brainstorming on producer needs. Leading us into the next segment of module 3, we have Southeast Regional Director of the National Center for Appropriate Technology, Margot Hale. Margot, go ahead and take it away.
All right. Thank you all for having me today. It's good to be with you all, and I will be sharing module 3. So give me just a second here to share my slides. All right, hopefully you all can see that. I can't see any chat or any pictures, so you can't see it.
We've got you for the chat, Margot.
Okay, awesome. Oh, well, I see it. It started at the last slide, so hang on just a second. We'll zoom backwards real fast. Sorry about that. All right. Okay, so module 3, as Thomas said, my name is Margot Hale, and I am NCAT's Southeast Regional Director based in Fayetteville, Arkansas. And I also work as a livestock specialist here at NCAT, and do a lot of trainings with beginning farmers, farmer veterans. And for about the past 8 or 9 years, I've worked directly with farm to school programs here in Arkansas. I supervised the Food Corps Arkansas program for many years, and so that gave me a chance to work directly with schools. I got to know a lot of child nutrition directors and have done quite a few trainings with producers, helping them access school markets. So, and that's just a little bit about me and why I'm here talking to you about choosing the right product to sell. So the previous modules that you guys have seen help producers learn about and narrow down marketing channels for their products to enter into schools. And the previous modules also talked about creating those relationships with schools and child nutrition directors, and really learning how to develop that relationship so they could have that market to sell to schools. Module 3 really helps producers have a better understanding of how their products might fit into a school menu and help them determine the types of products that are a good fit with their chosen school or their chosen school market. And this module also talks about product adaptation, so some processing and things like that. So we can help producers determine if any processing is needed in order to take their products that they're producing into the schools and to meet the needs of those school buyers. This material is on page 65 of your facilitator guide, and a similar but not exactly the same version is in the producer workbook on page 26. And this gives an overview of what is included in this module. And you will see that the facilitator guide includes more details such as additional training materials, suggested activities, the case studies, those types of things. Once again, you guys have seen this for previous modules, so it's the same for module 3. This curriculum map is on page 14 of your facilitator guide, and this map provides a high-level overview of all of the content in module 3. So you can refer to this to get acquainted with the materials in your facilitator guide. And once again, this is similar for the other modules. The activities and worksheets for this module are also located in the producer workbook. And we'll cover those throughout this presentation to get you familiar with those activities and worksheets. You can see in this module, it contains 2 different sections, and we'll give you an overview of those sections, the activities, and the other supplemental case studies and resources that we have put together for this module. So in module 2, we discussed how meeting with a school nutrition director can help a producer identify types of products that they might be able to sell to a school, and also, volume requirements that a school is looking to purchase. And this section really discusses school cooking infrastructure and a school district's capacity, what type of meal programs they have and other needs, how all of those things together influence what types of products a producer might be able to sell to a school or a school district. And then the second section of this module helps producers think about really moving their product from the field to the schools. And as I mentioned, we'll touch on processing and, if we need to turn our raw products into value-added products to meet the needs of the schools. So the learning objectives for module 3 are to understand how your products can fit into school meal menus, identify products and quantities that best fit. And once again, this is based on the needs and capacity of the school buyers. Identify how your products can be adapted to meet the needs of their school buyers, and then explore how product pricing and production costs can help determine the best product for school markets. And that last objective we just touch on in this module, and then module 4 really goes into depth on that topic. So this is the background information for module 3. You can find this on in your facilitator guide on page 65 and 66. And this outlines the core concepts for this module, a couple of digging deeper resources that we'll reference in the slide deck. And so it'd be good for you to review those and be familiar with those 2 resources before presenting this material. And then the case studies, which I'll highlight in this presentation, and then you can spend some time exploring all the wonderful case studies that have been put together and are available on the Bringing the Farm to School website. So we'll talk about how you can use those case studies for this Module 3 presentation. All right, so Section A, choosing the right product, school considerations. So when you're presenting this module, after you kind of introduce the general topic and the flow of the module, the presentation starts off with discussing how to choose the right product based on the kitchen capacities of the district producers are selling to. So understanding, the schools that you're going to sell to, can they cook from scratch? And do they have a central kitchen? Do they have storage capacity? What types of volumes they're looking for in the products that they're purchasing? All of those points are very important for a producer to have some understanding of, and to determine if their products would be a good fit for that school district. And, some producers in your group, they might already be selling products to a school. And so that would be a great opportunity for them to share. Or others might have products in mind that they think they might want to sell to a school. So definitely, hear from your audience, hear what they're thinking as far as, what products they think would be a good fit. And as you go throughout the module, you'll be able to talk through some of those options. And really, at the beginning here is a really good time to tie in the concepts that were covered in modules 1 and 2. So once again, thinking about the meal programs, do you know what meal programs and what options are available in the school that you're trying to sell to, how many meals they're serving and the volumes that they're serving. And really, in module 2, when we talked about connecting with a school nutrition director and developing that relationship, and that's a great place to get some of these questions answered. So your producers have some idea of the needs of the school. All right, this is slide 6 in the slide deck for module 3. So after the first few slides briefly discuss kitchen capacity and finding a good product that fits based on capacity, this slide shows producers how easy it is to look at a district's menu and to see if their product that they have in mind is a good fit, or a product that they grow might be a good fit for their menu. I think looking at a school menu is just a really good introduction to for producers to understand the types of products that schools are serving, to see if what they're growing is already on the menu, because that's the best place to start. So, really advising producers that, schools are more likely to directly substitute an item already on their menu with a local version. So for example, if they're serving apples on their menu, a local apple is a really easy substitution. As was talked about in some of the earlier modules, with some of the requirements for meeting their different meal plans and the different requirements, we can't be too creative in swapping out products, because the schools definitely have to meet all the requirements. So a straight across substitution is a really good place to start. I would say this slide is an opportunity for regionalization. So find some local menus, depending on where you're hosting your training at, and finding menus from that local school district would be a great way to incorporate that. And maybe even showing a couple of examples from different school districts. Definitely size of districts and the capacity of their kitchens influence what their menus look like a little bit. So just so producers can get an idea of once again, the products that schools are serving. So the next couple of slides talk about volume requirements. And this, I think, is always kind of a little bit tricky. There is a little bit of math potentially involved, which personally, I get a few heart palpitations thinking about doing math. I will not be walking through any math problems today. But slides 7 and 8 kind of talk about identifying the volume requirements. Once again, working with the school buyer to determine, the number of servings needed or the volume requirements needed for certain products. And really thinking, are there options for smaller volumes? I know, maybe a producer will see in a solicitation or in talking to a buyer, a really large volume or, a certain volume over an extended period of time. And that's overwhelming for producers, and especially if they're very new to, selling directly to schools. So I would encourage producers, don't be intimidated by volume requirements. School nutrition directors can help with that kind of conversion of this is the volume that I need and what that translates to as far as either pounds of a product or number of cases or, whatever it may be, depending on the product. And there's a great tool, and it's listed in the Facilitator's Guide, the USDA School Food Buying Guide. And it breaks down those volume requirements and helps do the math. It gives you the formulas for converting those meal requirements into, actual pounds of product or whatever it may be. The example that is given in the slide deck is for carrot sticks. And so, it converts that 100 servings into how many pounds of carrots. And so that's a good tool for producers to kind of work through that, to have an idea of the products that they are interested in growing or that they already have, and how that translates to, the number of servings and then the school's needs for, what they are serving, the number of meals they're serving, or their need for their volume. And then if they need help with math, don't ask me. Okay, so the next few slides really cover different types of cooking infrastructure that you might see in schools. Once again, this is where that relationship with the school nutrition director is really important. So a producer can learn, what is the capacity of the schools? Are they, doing lots of processing and cooking from scratch in kitchens? Do they have very limited resources on equipment and things that they do and how they prepare their food? Is all the food prepared in one central kitchen and then distributed to schools? And all of that information is really helpful for producers, in thinking about what products are a good fit. And so these slides break down those different types of kitchens and cooking infrastructure and explain how, the infrastructure dictates the types of products and the level of processing a school district, is able to do, or what might need to happen to a producer's products before they can be used in the school. I do want to point out, we show salad bars here, and salad bars typically have been a really great place for producers to get their product into schools. It's often a place, that doesn't necessarily have to have large volumes or maybe, a consistent supply. Many schools are able just to incorporate local product onto salad bars whenever they have it. Obviously, COVID has changed this for salad bars, and salad bars, at least for the time being, are generally not in operation, but hopefully we'll be able to, get salad bars up and running again. But a lot of times those products onto salad bars are a really good kind of entryway first step for producers getting their products into schools. In slide 13, the presentation talks about how, certain crops will continue or will require a continuous harvest. And other products are a really good fit because you can harvest them once and deliver them to the school, and then they can use them up. So once again, understanding capacity for storage. So, this picture here is of some bins of sweet potatoes. And if your school does not have storage space or capacity for bins of sweet potatoes, then that wouldn't be a good fit. But for those that do have that capacity, this is a great opportunity for producers, harvest once, deliver hundreds and hundreds of pounds of product, and then the school uses them as they need, or, work them into processing or whatever it is the school might do with it. So, think about that and make sure producers are thinking about that. Products that need a continuous harvest, are going to need to be succession planting and other methods for extending their production, which will be talked about more later. But just things to get producers thinking about the types of products that they have and really how that works within a school setting. The final slide in this section includes tips for producers that are just getting started in school sales, and also some tips, if they have a product that might not fit into a formal solicitation process. So once again, maybe you don't have the volume needed to meet a bid, or maybe the school has some special events or special programs where they're just needing smaller amounts on a one-time basis. So I'm making sure that producers are aware of these opportunities, harvest of the month, or sometimes schools will do a local meal once a semester, or once a year, and that can be a good opportunity to just have a one-time purchase. Or maybe a school is interested in developing some new recipes or trying out some new recipes, and so there's some opportunities for taste tests. And maybe if there's a new product that they would really like to see the school serve. And also there's opportunities, really outside of the cafeteria with classrooms. If you have a relationship with teachers who might be interested in doing a food lesson or something like that, there's other opportunities to sell your products. All right. This is one of the case studies included in Module 3. And this is a short excerpt from a longer case study that we have both in video form and in written form. And this features Ali Marachek. She is the Child Nutrition Director in the Fayetteville Public Schools in Fayetteville, Arkansas. And she is talking about tips to producers on approaching and working with a school nutrition director. So I'm going to share this clip. You'll have to bear with me as I switch screens real quick.
Yeah, well, I would say number one, bring samples. You will have, a lot more luck with the child nutrition director when you bring them something tasty to eat, and also so you can showcase how different the flavor might be, or bring some different varieties that maybe they've never seen before. They're used to seeing that from their broker, so to kind of align with that would be great. Also, come to the conversation knowing what you need for your farm operation. Just so that they can plan accordingly, and you can decide together whether it's a good market for your operation. Mm-hmm. So probably the quickest and most simple explanation for how we manage purchasing relationships with growers is through a bid process, and the type of bidding you do depends on how much you're likely going to buy from the grower. But we have early conversations, and we are allowed to share previous pricing or current pricing with the grower, so they can see if that pricing is something similar might work for their business, and then they can decide whether they participate in our bidding solicitation, all of that we're required to do. So you can have initial conversations about price before that happens. You can't tell them the price to put down, but it's just, it's open information that anyone could request. And we primarily purchase directly from growers. We have a district warehouse that we can receive the items at, so the growers make one delivery, but we do very little local purchasing through a distributor or other sort of third party. It's direct from the producer.
All right. Let me get back to my next. Okay, hopefully we're back and you're seeing my slides. Okay, so that gives you a little taste of that case study. And we'll share more about the other case studies in this module in just a little bit. So, okay, here we go. All right, so the next part of this module is an activity. And this is a school menu brainstorm. And for this activity, producers will have the opportunity to spend some time looking at a menu. There's one in the appendix of the producer workbook, or there's one in the slide deck. And really, I would encourage you to bring either a menu or several different menus from your state or your region, or, you know, if you're in a particular location, see if you can get your hands on some of those school menus. I know it's very common for schools to put their school menus up on their website, so it should be pretty easy to find several examples. And so have the producers spend about 10 minutes brainstorming what products might be a good fit or a substitute for the menu items. And they can look at the menus and identify products that they are already producing or products that they potentially could produce. And in the producer workbook on page 27, there is a spot where they can write down the menu item and write down the product that they have or could grow. So just once again, a really good way for producers to look at school menus and be thinking about, you know, what are they already doing that would be a good fit for this school. Section B of Module 3 focuses on how producers can alter their products, if needed, to meet a school's cooking or processing limitations, or just, you know, their basic needs of what they need, like we talked about in the first section of this module. So as trainers, you will help producers understand the different types of processing. So going from a raw product, for example, raw carrots, to light processing, such as carrot coins, to a high value added product, such as parboiled product, dried or frozen product. Another important point that we want trainers to make in this section is that it can be really expensive to add processing infrastructure to a farm. And so, you know, while we talk about maybe you can do some processing or add some value-added processing to your farm, it really might be a better option to connect with regional processing centers or other buyers that can do that processing for a farmer. So for those producers who are interested in investing in infrastructure for processing, there are a few slides in this section that talk about financing and funding for farmers to retrofit their operations in order to do some of that minimal processing. So any of you who work with producers know that where can they get money, what grants, what financing options? That's always one of their first questions. So there are a few slides in this presentation about that. And then finally, the last section gets producers to start thinking about the cost of getting their farm product to the buyer, and really kind of get them thinking as we move into module 4 about their cost of production. So in this section, it starts off by reminding producers that school capacity will dictate the types of products and the level of processing required. Once again, as we talked about earlier with, the types of kitchens or the storage capacity, the level of processing that a school is able to do can really dictate, what products a school might be interested in purchasing from, from a producer. I know, some schools that, because they have enough staff and enough space and the proper equipment, they're able to buy a lot of raw product and process it themselves. But not all schools have that capacity. So, once again, here's a good time to ask producers to think about those capacity discussions and, how that might affect processing. Slides 19 and 20 discuss light processing, mainly of fruits and vegetables, and, what that level of processing means exactly. Producers might see some different processing, requirements or requests on solicitation bids. And so this gives just a little bit of information about what that means exactly. And once again, going back to what was covered in Module 2, through an initial meeting with a child nutrition director, a producer can ask about processing capacity and the cooking infrastructure at schools. So once again, that relationship and having some of that information, before you really dive into selling a product to a school is really important for a producer. The next couple of slides discuss processing for meat and other high value added products, such as pre-cooked fruits and vegetables. And these types of products really require extensive infrastructure and are probably best left to a processing kitchen or a meat processor. If you're working with livestock producers who obviously are going to have their meat processed in a USDA or state inspected facility, depending on your state. And so some of those processors will have different levels of value-added product capacity and what products they might be able to, to process for a producer. These levels of processing are typically not things that a farmer is going to add directly onto their own operation, but it's good to be familiar with these types of processing. As trainers, it will be helpful for you to be familiar with state and regional examples of value-added processing facilities, whether it be for meat products or just processing kitchens or facilities that, might be available to the producers. And also be familiar with if there's any financing available, either regionally or state, for this type of processing. Producers will likely have many questions about processing rules and regulations. So once again, as a trainer, just be aware that those are the types of questions they're probably going to ask. And especially, the previous couple of slides, those light processing, some of those things that are more likely to be done, maybe integrated into the farm. Understanding what your state or local regulations are for on-farm processing would be really helpful, because I'm sure the producers will have those questions. So the next few slides in the slide deck, kind of talk about different options for processing. And here there is a lot of options for regionalization. So once again, being familiar with regional processing kitchens in your area, and being aware of farm to school grantees in your state that are using grants for processing, or maybe of other producers who have maybe added some on-farm processing or are working with other processors in order to get their products into schools. So any examples, especially examples in your area, are really helpful for producers. They want to hear from the farmers who've actually done it and see those examples. And then finally, I mentioned to producers that adding value is not just through processing. there are many ways that being a local product is adding value. And so help them to start thinking beyond just processing about how their products add value, whether it be because they're local and they're super fresh, the ability for them to host maybe farm visits or farm tours or go speak to schools. Those are ways that, that sets them apart, that they can provide that extra value that a school isn't going to get by, purchasing carrots from a distributor. So I'm kind of thinking outside the box beyond just, processing their product. Slide 26 talks about the importance of timing and how schools and producers need to consider timing for processing and just production and sales in general, really, for farm to school. We know this is always an issue. We've included this slide that features an excerpt from a case study with Glenn Holmes. And many of you may be familiar with Mr. Holmes and his work in farm to school for many, many years. And I won't play this clip for you, but know that there's a short clip here, and then the full case study is available with other case studies on the Bringing Farm to School webpage. And so Mr. Holmes talks about, timing and ways you can address that. And I do want to note that this slide with the excerpt from Mr. Holmes was added to the slide deck late. And so from here on out, the slide numbers, whenever you actually are looking at the actual presentation slide deck, the slide numbers are off by one compared to your facilitator guide. But I know you guys can handle that. But this was a late addition. So slides 28 through 30 walk producers through some of the costs to consider, and even doing just minimal processing. There's going to be costs involved no matter what you're doing. So even just the time or transportation, extra labor, whatever it may be. And so get producers thinking about those costs, because sure, maybe they can get a higher price for those minimally processed products, but there are costs involved. There is another producer spotlight that features meat processing. And the great thing with all of these case studies and producer spotlights, you can choose which ones you want to share with your group, depending on your producer group. There might be some that are more applicable than others, and you as trainers, you get to choose that. And then finally on slide 30, this is the slide that features a list of potential grant and low interest loan funds for investing in infrastructure and processing capacity on a producer's farm. And this list is also available for producers in the Digging Deeper section of their producer workbook. Once again, that's a great place for any regionalization. If you know of any, local or state-based funding opportunities that would be applicable, that's a great place to share that with your producers. And also, if you have any producers in your training group who have incorporated processing or anything like that on their farm, ask them how they have funded that venture. Once again, hearing from producers is really the best thing for other producers. All right, so there are a few more producer spotlight videos that you can feature. Once again, play them all, pick and choose. There is one on beef to school and another on a value-added noodle product. So depending on your audience, you can choose or just play all of them. All right, the next thing in this module is an applied activity. And this activity is giving a values pitch to your neighbor. So you will ask producers to turn to their neighbor and give their values pitch. So what sets their product apart you can give an example. What sets your product apart from a wholesale distributor? So they can turn to their neighbor and talk about the product that they're going to sell, say what sets their product apart, why their product is better than another. So I'm planning for about 10 minutes for this activity. You know, maybe you'll have some willing participants who will share their values pitch with the whole group. But it's a good way to, once again, get producers thinking about the values, you know, what sets their product apart, and you know, what are those features that they can really bring out in that marketing. The next few slides start the discussion about understanding pricing. As we mentioned earlier, we're going to talk more in depth about understanding pricing and knowing cost of production in Module 4. And this is really such an important topic for producers. And, you know, I work with producers all the time, and this is, you know, producers are not great about knowing understanding their cost of production and knowing, you know, how to price their products. So this is a really important topic. This is a really great time for producers to understand that not all products are going to be a good fit for a school market. There are going to be some products that are a really good fit, and those products typically will have a lower production cost. You know, I know we talked about school meal budgets, and we know that, you know, there's, of course, not as much money for schools to spend on local products as we all wish there were. And so just understanding that, you know, schools have a certain budget that they're working with, and, you know, while they want to purchase local products, that has to fit with their budget. And also, it really has to work for the producer's budget as well. And I know Allie mentioned that in that short clip that we watched, and I think she talks about it more in the longer video. But it's really important for a producer to know what they need for their product and what products are a good fit, and based on those prices and other, you know, other things such as the volumes and you know, for how long the product is needed, and all of those factors that we've talked about. So really thinking about those products and how they can fit into a school menu, understanding their cost of production. As Allie mentioned in her clip, you know, looking at current pricing and what schools have paid in the past for those certain products can help producers get an idea if you know, their cost of production can be met by what a school can pay. Once again, we go into a deeper dive into this in Module 4. I will point out in the producer workbook on page 29, there's some additional information about this understanding pricing, because it really is such an important part. We need this farm to school market. While it's a great opportunity for producers, it really has to be a good fit for their business. The final activity in Module 3 is modeled after the Washington Department of Agriculture product planning chart. And this can be found on page 32 in the producer workbook. And this worksheet prompts producers to really think about that process of moving their product kind of along the line from the field to getting it to the school. And so, you know, maybe in the earlier menu planning or menu brainstorm, maybe they identified a product. And so this is a great opportunity for them to say, you know, I've identified this product, and these boxes, walk them through thinking about, you know, how is the product that I can offer, how is it, you know, solving a problem for the school, and, you know, kind of thinking about the competition of, you know, where else could they get this product and why should they choose mine? Is there any processing needed? And, you know, how will I make that happen if that's needed? And then creating some action steps for determining what are the next steps for your product development. So as I mentioned earlier, there are several case studies that go along with Module 3. And there's videos and written case studies. You can find these on the Bringing the Farm to School webpage with all of the other case studies. And once again, you can choose the ones that are a good fit for your audience. And really, if you have some examples, some local or regional examples, use those. Those are always a great thing to provide that connection to your local producers. Okay, and finally, the action planning check-in is for trainers to review and ask producers to reflect on those essential questions related to product development. So for Module 3, these check-in questions are on page 55 of the Facilitator Guide. And in this module, these check-in questions include: have producers identified the product or set of products that will work for school sales? Do these products need to be processed in any way? And if so, how is that going to happen? And then finally, ensure that producers understand how to find the tools to understand their cost of production, which once again will be expanded on in the following section. And then after that reflection, be sure to leave some time for producers to determine their short-term goals to meet some of those gaps and really address those questions. And I've mentioned it throughout this presentation, but really there are many opportunities to regionalize the content of Module 3. Think about using local school menus. If you have some pictures from local school kitchens, or maybe their storage capacity or processing capacity, try to include those. Think about farm to school grantees in your region that you could elevate, and especially those who have used grants to incorporate some value-added processing or on-farm processing. Any of those that you can incorporate, would be great. And as always, think about using those local grantees or other farmers who are selling to schools, feature them in panels and incorporating them into your training. Producers love to hear from other producers. So anytime you can incorporate that is will be really effective in getting this message across. All right, so that is Module 3. I'll stop sharing. I don't know if there's any questions or discussion.
Yeah, Margo, we've had a few questions around what we mean by regional processing centers, and because that means different things in so many different regions and states, and actually a couple of folks, both Jane from Minnesota and Teresa from Iowa, said that there aren't very many processing options. So, how do you help producers in understanding some alternative options if processing isn't really available in their states?
Good question. And if anyone from NCAT or the network wants to chime in, I gladly welcome that. I will say I completely recognize that. And I'm in Arkansas, and there too are not that many processing options. I do know, for example, I'll give you a couple of examples, and it might help you think of opportunities in your state or region. The University of Arkansas, their food science department has a commercial kitchen that producers can use, and they will work with producers to help develop value-added products. It's a licensed kitchen, and producers can go in and do minimal processing all the way up to full product development with value-added products. So that's one example. Another example here in Arkansas, our state extension has recently launched a program using county fairgrounds, where there are oftentimes kitchens or commercial kitchens, and helping get those spaces certified. So once again, producers can access that space to do some processing in that certified kitchen. So, there are other examples of, places where producers can, pay a fee to go in and use a kitchen to do processing or value-added production. I would love to hear if there are any other examples or ideas. And I will also say, because I mentioned at the beginning, I work with livestock producers. I myself am a livestock producer. And so I completely understand the lack of processing for livestock producers and getting, beef or any other, meat product into schools. And that processing capacity is a barrier just in general for livestock producers, and obviously, especially, getting into a school market. So I wish I had a good answer for that, but I don't. Just I'll commiserate with you at the producers that I know it's a challenge.
Giselle, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly, but she says that there's county commissary kitchens, and I would second that in Montana, not in the Midwest, but we do have a lot of community development centers that contain opportunities for a fee-based processing.
Yeah, and I will just note, I know I said it's important to be familiar with what your state and local regulations are for processing, and encourage producers to get creative. Oftentimes, it's just they need a licensed, commercial kitchen, and so sometimes there's opportunities to use kitchens, maybe it's at a community building, a place that does kids programs or something like that, maybe a producer can go in on the weekends or in the evenings and use that space to do some processing. So, be creative.
One other question about slide 34, mentioning the pricing for hospitals and restaurants. Can you go into that further? So putting that, and I'll try to find the exact page. How does that differ from what is listed on the AMS wholesale processing guide?
I can mention, I was referencing,
thank you.
It says
Great.
slide 34. It might be, the numbers might be off, but it was the one that was talking about when you're trying to understand pricing, and the USDA AMS has the wholesale pricing guides. And then it says other wholesale markets, hospitals and restaurants. So I know for a lot of restaurants, there might be a higher margin, and so that might differ, but I was curious how hospitals might be unique.
I can try to take a stab at that. Because I mean, I think this is just trying to understand what a typical wholesale price is, and working with producers throughout the country, we have heard that some of the AMS wholesale pricing guides can actually be inaccurate based on what the running wholesale price within your state or even county is. So that's why kind of looking more at either region or like even local wholesale market prices. And so that's where like working with other farmers, if they're willing to share some of that information, or if you're already kind of selling through those wholesale outlets. So that's really what that is, just kind of giving an idea to producers in the talking points, giving ideas for producers to understand how to determine what's the kind of going wholesale price.
That makes sense, especially if a producer was used to just selling to a restaurant, and obviously talking about wholesale pricing is really different there. So thank you.
Yeah, and I hope I didn't slaughter your name. So please.
No, it's Giselle. I think you did well. It might have been a little off. I honestly didn't even notice. So thank you for trying.
Hi, this is Tammy in Iowa. Hold on, I'm having problems with my phone and my computer. Just a minute. We do, AMS does collect our data. We have the Iowa Local Farm to School Purchase Report. And I don't know if you've all seen that, but that's a great report. And maybe I've missed that if that was addressed here. But that is done through schools voluntarily reporting information.
Thanks, Tammy. That is great. And I'm gonna maybe also, Jenny Lee, we can look for finding that purchase report and include it as a link in the chat. Or if you have that handy, we'd really love it if you would put that in there. That'd be great.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I know in the clip from Allie, she mentioned it. I think it's really important for producers just to like get in their brains the ballpark figures of prices that schools are paying for products. So talking about if they're used to selling directly to consumers or selling to restaurants, sometimes that shock of seeing lower prices, so just once again, we want them to have all of the information so they have a really good understanding of what this market looks like for them.
And then finally, we had a comment from Jane about, kind of getting into some of those legal and state-based issues regarding processing. And in some states, I think Minnesota is also similar to Montana, that, you can sell your own product off the farm without a license, but if it's processed in a commercial grade kitchen, but and I think that's pretty similar here. But as Jane has pointed out a few times, it's just like trying to create that communication channel with schools so that they actually understand what's legal, because sometimes, and we'll talk about that a little bit in the next module about like the food safety requirements too, is just creating a open communication so folks understand what's legal.
Yes, there's unfortunately so much misinformation and myths about what is allowed or not allowed. Great point, Jane.
But we're about to transition into our breakout groups for the first one for today. We are hoping that folks will look at Jamboards 9 and 10. And so that's really looking at brainstorming farmer needs in your state and how those needs can inform your training agenda. And just want to note that if you still have some other Jamboards to get through from yesterday that you haven't yet, you can also use that time to do that. And just remember, as a reminder, I'm trying to find the link, but all the Jamboard links are in the participant home base doc, which I just dropped in the chat if you need help navigating there. And then hopefully Tracy can take us away into our breakout groups, and we'll be there until 1:50 Central Time.
Okay. All right, folks. So I'm going to talk about Module 4, and that's that growing from schools. So taking your product from the ground all the way over to the schools. And Module 4 contains a lot of business planning and production planning, and it's really that portion of the training. And you can see the facilitator facing resources for Module 4 starting on page 79 of your facilitator guide, and that producer version is on page 33 of the producer workbook. So Module 4 focuses on the whole farm business planning and business planning considerations for scaling up for school markets, crop and livestock production planning, as well as those food safety considerations. There are a lot of tools and resources identified in this module to help producers evaluate whether school markets are a good fit for their farms. But keep in mind, it's important to consider the folks on your training team, because this is that the side, if they're not very strong on if they're pretty strong in the procurement side, for example, they may not be experienced on training producers on the business and financial and management principles. So you just want to make sure that you have a good mix of skilled folks to conduct this portion of the training. So again, here's that kind of high level overview in the curriculum outline, and those are in the beginning, earlier part of your facilitator guide. And this is a long module, so you can see it goes over 2 pages. As with all the training modules, you can see this, this is kind of the quick glance of the core content and the concepts for this module, the learning objectives, and the training activities to help producers reinforce this information. And as you can see in column 4 in the training activities and materials, this module is actually pretty heavy on the applied activities, and there's a pretty heavy focus on worksheets to help reinforce some of the concepts and get producers thinking about whether or not schools are a good fit. So the learning objectives for Module 4 are listed on your screen there. And we want farmers to understand and assess their capacity for selling to schools, explore that price point, and then that return on investment, if investment is required to scale up for school markets. And then finally, understanding if they are needing to scale up, some of the infrastructure that might be needed, and including those in those calculations of whether or not it's a good fit for producers. And I do want to say that, while we want to increase the number of producers that are selling to schools, I think it's also a really important thing, an important goal for you folks as trainers to consider if, folks are not ready to sell to schools, that's a win too, right? So just really understanding your producer audience and making sure they know by the end of this training whether or not it's a good fit for them. So on your screen, you see the core concepts that you can also check out on page 80 of your facilitator guide. And those core concepts align with the producer learning objectives that were on your on the last slide. And they include that understanding the business and financial planning principles, as well as production planning principles, understanding how food safety can be communicated with schools, and then and there's like we had mentioned, there's a lot of resources on the production planning and enterprise analysis. And so that is something that you as a trainer might want to consider in terms of, you know, looking at these resources, because we do include a lot of these resources as you move through the module, and we actually bring them up and have producers start looking at them. So just something for you to kind of review before you're doing this actual training of this particular module. And also consider you finding resources that are similar that work in your state. And also I should mention that if you're using, and I see I got a little typo there, sorry about that. So if you're using this resource on off of your facilitator guide, the online version has, these are all embedded links on the online version on page 80 of your facilitator guide. And they're also included in Appendix A for further resources. So Section A is intended to help producers understand if selling to schools is a good choice for their farm business and their family or farm goals. So it reviews that whole farm planning process that Jenny Lee had talked about in the introduction. We want producers to kind of revisit their goals here. And selling to school markets requires producers to be proactive in their planning and understanding their costs. So if it doesn't look profitable on the paper, then it's probably not going to be profitable extending into that planning process, and it won't really be a reality. So, you know, we'll be reviewing some of the tools that you can use to help assist producers in making that decision process. So yeah, slide 5 in this module, and you can see it on page 82, is just a review and another prompt for producers to review whether or not the channels they've been considering that get their products to schools, if they're a good fit for their goals, right? And so this is just kind of an opportunity to gauge that with the producers in the audience. Yeah, and so slide 6 to 9 really go through that pricing piece. We want you to take some time and discuss the business planning and financial tools that are at producers' disposal to understand what that break-even price point is. If they are investing in, you know, making some investments to access some school markets, what is that return on investment? So there are numerous models and software programs out there. We list a few here in the slides. So you can, when you access the slide decks, you'll be able to click on those. Many producers, hopefully, that you're working with have had some wholesale experience, and they will have an idea of what their costs are. They might not have a clear understanding, and this will provide the opportunity for them to really dig in. And then finally, that information can be used to actually create a cash flow statement, which can be critical to farms in aligning their monthly expenses with the school year and their gross sales. Because the school will often have kind of extended payment terms. So understanding how the pricing can extends in a cash flow format is really helpful in working with schools. So these slides also correspond with the producer workbook on page 35. So it includes, that page 35 includes a lot of resources to help producers make those calculations. And again, encourage producers to look at that workbook online and use the embedded links. So I'm not gonna play this, but I wanted to feature or show you this producer spotlight of Katrina Becker from Cattail Organics. And she's based in North Central Wisconsin, and kind of helps with this like myth busting of like you have to be at a certain scale to sell to schools. And Katrina's farm is only about 5 to 6 acres, and so she has some really, this excerpt really focuses on her discussion about price points. So I do want to mention that Katrina is in kind of an area where there's very limited cell phone reception. So when I was doing the podcast with her, the audio quality isn't crystal clear, but it's just what she had to say was so critical. So we've still included it as a resource here. And she has some great insight into the price point pieces. So she mentions in this podcast that, you know, when they first started out, they considered competing with distributors for pricing, but the farm doesn't do that in general anymore. They actually keep really good records on their cost of production and the profitability of each crop that's grown on the farm. And so the farm, so they consider their farm prices to be pretty high by wholesale standards. So, and one example she used is by lettuce by the pound. So they have been working with food service directors in bulk lettuce mix, and the folks at the food service and Wausau School District said that they can usually, like from a standard distributor, expect to throw away about 1/3 of their product from a distributor, but they get virtually no waste from the Cattail Organic stuff. So they charge their standard $7 a pound for their lettuce mix. But the food service director is willing to pay it because they are they're getting no waste from that product. So really great example there. And also just a little quote right here from Katrina about their planning, and then expectations about not feeling like you need to provide all of your food product to the school district, but just finding those specific products that really work, like what Margot was saying from Module 3. So next up for this particular section, we want producers to really dig into that break-even price. And we want them to spend about like 15 minutes on this particular activity. And you can break out producers by similar enterprise type, or you can just, if folks are really just wanting to like sit down and think about their product and break even price, they can of course work individually. And this is what the workbook version of this activity looks like. So kind of looking at the product and the price per pound, what the fixed costs are, variable costs. Folks that work a lot with the with enterprise budgets definitely would be a great fit on teaching this particular section. All right, so we can't really talk about doing selling to schools without talking a little bit about scaling up production. But again, you know, there are plenty of examples of producers that are at a small scale that are selling to schools. But we do feel like this was an important thing to include in this particular module. And another note about this is sections B through D, which is scaling up, and then there's some enterprise specific production planning, can actually be used as a standalone resource. And we've been talking in the Minnesota group about kind of breaking up the trainings just because of producer availability and such. And so this might be another really great opportunity to do that if needed. So in slides 13 through 14, which can also be viewed on the facilitator guide, starting on page 85, so we discuss how those different channels that reach the school can affect the scale and how you might need to scale up in order to meet the demand of that market. And the one thing we do encourage with farms that are thinking about scaling up is making sure that they're really solid in their production skills. So that's something you really need to help producers evaluate. And one way to do that is have farmers start thinking about the weakest link that is preventing the farm from being successful. And we kind of take that approach to this scaling up section. So slides 15 through 17, we want trainers to help producers understand, there's some generalized factors that can lead to a really successful scaling up or a really painful scaling up. And certainly labor is one of those really important considerations for scaling up, and it can be, one of the biggest expenses for a farm. So you may want to actually spend a little extra time on that section, and then consider adding some extra slides with your state labor laws. And then, slides 18 through 20, just review some of the very school-specific considerations for scaling up. That includes that consistency piece, and then the pricing, of course, meeting those budget needs, and then the grading, packing, and labeling is another really big consideration. Does the farm have the ability to meet the grading and packing standards of the school? And if not, what type of resources would need to be invested to do that? So slides 21 through 22 really kind of focus on that risk management piece, and food safety is brought up here. Mainly as a scaling up consideration, though, because we want farmers to understand that if you are going to increase your scale and increase the gross your gross revenue, then you may also need to consider that you will no longer fall under the Food Safety Modernization Act exemption. So that might mean adding some costly infrastructure to meet those requirements. And then finally, most schools will require some kind of liability insurance. So thinking about what liability insurance is, and how much that's going to cost. And then thinking about a lot of folks that scale up tend to grow less crops, but grow fewer crops, but more of those specific crops. So thinking about actual crop insurance is another thing, because you have less diversity means more risk. Yeah, so some final considerations in the scaling up section is just reminding producers that it might not be necessary. So really, really elevating some of the examples from folks that haven't scaled up but are still successfully just being really successful and cognizant of their costs of production and being really efficient with the ground that they have. And it might be valuable to have a conversation about scaling. If they are thinking of scaling up their farm, consider doing that for multiple market channels, not just for schools. And then also, finally, I want to just say, somebody had mentioned Wholesale Success is a really great resource. I think that's kind of our go-to resource for scaling up, but that is also, they actually do wholesale success workshops, and you might want to consider that in place of this particular section. So yeah, going back to that weak link activity, this is located on page 30, I believe page 39 of your producer workbook. And the goal for the producer is really just to identify one and only one weak link that is holding their farm back from being successful or from entering into the future production for school sales. And, you know, everything else that might be identified as, you know, weaknesses within the farm, you know, can be addressed while selling to schools. However, you know, there's often many farms will have that weak link that is really preventing them from being successful. And so I wanted to ask some of our trainers here what they think of in terms of what might be a weak link on a farm. You can feel free to mute yourself and unmute yourself, excuse me, and or put some comments in the chat.
We're seeing quality control was one shared.
That's a great one. Yes, quality control. So thinking about how to enhance the quality of your product to make sure that you're providing the best quality product for your school. So creating goals around that. Any other ideas?
Now we're getting produce standards, packaging sizes, post-harvest management to delivery of product.
Yeah, that's a big one. Yeah, these are great. Awesome. Feel free to keep sharing those, and then I will move on to, before I move on to the next section, are there any questions about what I've talked about so far? Because I just kind of flew through the enterprise analysis and scaling up. So any questions, concerns, anything like that? Okay.
Tammy, there was one question that came in a little earlier in the chat box around resources that break down general profitability by product type. And Jane shared one resource from Iowa State University, but didn't know if you had any other resources you wanted to add there.
Yes, and I actually will be sharing some more of those resources that talk about general profitability based on market channel. So actually, that's a really awesome segue into the next section. We do have lots of different resources in the crop production and livestock production planning section that I'll discuss here. So section C, as you can see, it's crop production planning, should be primarily used for an audience comprising mostly of crop producers. And then section D is for livestock producers. So we encourage you to pick and choose these parts of the curriculum based on your audience and the type of producers in your training. If your audience consists of both types of producers, then you might want to consider actually breaking out into two groups here. So this is a producer spotlight that kind of debunks that scaling up section that I just did. These folks are pretty small, and they sell to a small school district in rural Montana. They're called Living Root Farm, and they discuss how they've used a lot of season extension tools as well as succession planning in their video to really meet the needs of this small school district in Hardin, Montana. So think it's a great resource related to this particular section of the training. Yeah, so slides 27 through 29, kind of extend that, good records really help with understanding your cost of production, but they also really help you understand if you can meet the needs of the school district. So, so we encourage producers to work backwards from that, from the bidding document or the agreement that folks have, producers have with the school, and then figure out the what, when, and where, and how the producer is going to actually meet the needs of the school. So kind of working backwards from basically what is that ultimate yield that you need and how often, and then creating a plan. And, if it's not going to pencil out, as we mentioned earlier, in the preseason, then it's probably not going to work out in the field. So these can really help make sure that you are being reliable to the schools, because that's one thing that they are going to really look at in terms of keeping a consistent, the consistency piece is important for school buyers. And then another thing about planning is that it can really help you as a producer or your producers manage risks. So crop growers, they need to plan for crop loss and thinking about that. And that's where these planning tools come in. And then livestock producers, as Margot mentioned, they might need to consider the challenges associated with processing dates, or if there's some fluctuation on animal weight. So all of those things are important to plan for. And this section really gives producers the tools they need to kind of figure out those pieces. Yeah, so speaking of tools, I don't know if this is what the person from Iowa was mentioning, but yeah, Craig Chase from Iowa State University, their extension program there, has developed this whole farm planning tool. And this is really based on a marketing outlet. So the producer can plug in their numbers and based on the marketing outlet, and then use it to understand if this particular marketing channel is actually going to be profitable for them. So that's a really great tool for folks to use, both in that enterprise analysis and then also helping producers understand like where some adjustments might need to happen within the production season. Here's another really great planning tool for crop producers that I use a lot on my farm here. I'm a microflower farmer, so I'm not going to sell to schools, but this is great for helping producers understand when they need to actually start seeding and how often to do some succession planting and target harvest date calculators. So this is a really great resource for you to have producers pull up while they're in their training and use to fill out their worksheet for the applied activity. And all of these are free. And as you can see, they're mostly, the seed starting calculator is actually an online resource, but the other ones are can be downloaded as Excel documents. So they're really great resource for that production planning piece. So yeah, that kind of leads into this next applied activity, which is again, spending quite a bit of time for producers to dig into that workbook on page 42, and thinking, here we have an example, and then we want folks to think about a weekly delivery for 8 weeks, and including what that production goal is and how much space is going to be required, and thinking about succession planning tool. So, and as Margot mentioned that, succession planning might not be necessary. There's some products that schools want that, especially if they have storage capacity, that is just a one and done deal. But others, like the lettuce mix that Katrina was talking about, definitely need a succession plan. All right, so this next section, like I said, really is very, has a similar approach, but it does focus on that animal protein production planning for school sales. And the first slide is, we call it an applied activity, but it's really just gauging the room to see if producers have, there's some differentiation with livestock and crops, right? So have the producers considered at this point how their protein product fits on the plate, and how it might work best with the schools that they're considering. And then slides 33 through 37 are also located in and identified on pages 94, starting on page 94 in the facilitator guide, and you can see what the producer facing resource is on page 43 in the producer workbook. And this section, producers we want them to bring out their menu thinking about portion sizes. So that's a really important thing in terms of figuring out how much product they're going to need on either a weekly basis. And as we discussed as Margot discussed in module 3, that school capacity is a really important piece and dictates what form the product needs to be in. So as you see here in this, on this third slide here, slide 35, we have producers that, schools that can take, a half a cow, but others will need, they'll need, like what we see in slide 34, they'll need the patties pre-made. So what does that, what does this encouraging producers to understand that school capacities equally or more important with animal protein production planning. And then finally, thinking about freezer storage, because in the case study with Allie that in the video you all saw just a little bit ago, she goes into the fact that they actually have a freezer capacity there. So they just get meat deliveries, local grass-fed beef deliveries a couple times a year, and they store it themselves. So and then finally, we want the livestock producers to think about that production planning piece, and this next resource here is really great for both the enterprise evaluation as well as some of those production planning pieces for livestock. And this is actually a series of downloadable spreadsheets that was created by the Center for Integrated Ag Systems. So I just need to do a shout out to our Midwestern folks here. We have, I featured a lot of resources from Midwestern states, and if other people have resources they'd like to share, please share them in the chat. But this is a great resource for farmers to think about their profit margins as well as the production planning piece. And it's also, I should mention, it's also a resource that can be used for crop producers. It's called Veggie Compass, and grain producers. So great resource. which is included as a link in your facilitator guide. And the final slide in this section really briefly touches on egg production. And this is a topic you may want to expand on if you have a producer audience that's really interested in this type of, selling eggs to schools. And so I would encourage you to kind of expand on this a little bit more and consider using some local examples of schools and producers selling eggs to schools. And the applied activity for section D is real similar to a section C, and we want producers to really dig into some of the compass and some of those other resources to, basically take that menu, or if they have an idea of what their product is, and kind of break it down by how much that most producers are going to understand what the pounds of meat per animal that they're producing already, and then how that translates into the school menu. So having producers kind of thinking about that and how they're going to fulfill those production quotas. Okay, so I'm going to pause here and see if there's questions, comments before I get into the navigating school food safety standards.
There was a question in the chat asking about if we had definitions for understanding farm size, whether that's acres, production, sales, and knowing that the term sort of small is hard to maybe different depending on all of those variables.
Yeah, and that's a really great point. And then like, what does it mean to scale up? So I think framing that section is pretty important based on your producer audience. So, there's some producers that might consider themselves small scale, especially like the grain producers out here in Montana. And I'm sure in many of the Midwestern states, small is very relative, right? So, I think it's more based on, scaling up is more it's based on taking the producer where they are and thinking about infrastructure, size investments, land investments, labor investments, and what are those investments that need to take place in order to meet a new market channel. And so that's kind of the way I typically address that scale consideration, is just kind of taking the producers where they're at. Okay, so let me go back to. Sorry, you'll have to bear with me. This is the first time I've used a dual monitor, and I'm excited about it, but I'm a little bit of a novice. Okay, so yeah, food safety and producers' inability to meet food safety requirements was identified as a top barrier in the needs assessment that Carolyn talked about on day one of this training, right? So we wanted to start this section off with a myth-busting video to help really illustrate that schools don't really have an obligation to follow any standards that are more strict than the state and federal requirements. So there's a lot of confusion, it seems like, around the different standard types of food safety and the standards versus certifications, and that extends from producers to buyers, right? So so we want to focus on some of this. We want this section to really focus on some of those misconceptions, and also kind of note some obvious differences between produce safety and meat processing safety, and some of the different standards and certifications that are out there. So, so I am going to pause sharing my screen. I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm going to bring up a video.
School district that they don't require gas. In lieu of that, our food service director was able to come and do a site visit where she worked through a checklist of food safety guidelines and made recommendations based on that to ensure that we had good general practices. Some of the things that she asked was that we exclude animals from our field, which we do with our metal deer fence, and also from our pack shed that has a roof over it. She also asked that we use an organic disinfectant in our wash water and that we stop using wet burlap to cover our crops in the walk-in cooler. So we switched to plastic. We do still use wet burlap on some of our other products that aren't going to the schools because we want to limit our plastic use. But in general, the recommendations that she made improved our overall practices anyway, and it was really good relationship building with her to ensure that there was trust between the food service director and the farmers.
All right, so so after producers listen to that video about Common Ground Farm, or if you want to elevate some similar producers in your state, we would like for you to talk about some of those common misconceptions about the food safety requirements from schools. If they're important things to point out here, though, are that schools that set specific food safety requirements other than the state or national standards, they'll actually communicate those in their solicitations. And also just remind producers that they still are required to meet state and federal standards. So have them, it might be good to, that would be another really great place to include any state specific standards that your state might have, and remind them of how to access those federal standards. And then this might also be another really good opportunity to plug the direct to school relationships. So slide 43 here, basically the talking points are, that, many distributors will require a GAP certification, and that, that direct to school relationship, as Erica had pointed out, is not necessarily they don't necessarily require a GAP certification. So there can be more flexibility there, I should say. So for the purposes of this training, it also might be good to share some of the commonly used acronyms and explain to producers what those mean and how they might be used when they're selling to schools. So, if producers understand the differences in the certification versus regulatory programs, that can really help them in communicating with school buyers. We don't go into depth in actually understanding the different standards and certifications because, we know there's a lot of different resources available at the state level to do that. So again, this is something that might be omitted if you have primarily crop producers, but and the same goes for, in contrast, if you have primarily livestock producers, you may want to omit the produce safety language and slides. So, but most meat producers are going to be taking their product to a processor, right? So understanding, and referencing some of the great resources on how to work and communicate with a meat processor. ATRA has a really great resource on making sure you have the correct communication tools, and so you're getting the cuts that a school might want. And then the food and nutrition service has some really great resource. This is more of like on the procurement side, but can also be super useful for producers to utilize as a resource when they're thinking about selling meat, poultry, or any kind of animal protein to schools. So there's a couple of really good resources there. And then, like I said earlier, we understand there's a lot of in-depth food safety trainings. And for example, in the Minnesota team, there's a couple of food safety trainers on that team, which is wonderful. So we suggest that you, instead of like going, this is a pretty intense series of modules to begin with. So we suggest that maybe just instead of like going in depth on the food safety piece, just actually referring producers to the amazing resources that most states have at this point. And you as a facilitator, just if you're not, just get familiar with those resources. Many have extension folks on your team. And like I said, like the Minnesota team had a few Produce Safety Alliance trainers. So if you don't have one, try to find those folks out, try to find out who those folks are at the state level. And then if your state doesn't have very many resources, NCAT's ATRA program has some really great food safety resources on the ATRA website. And that includes videos, lots of podcasts, and actual produce safety tutorial. That's a series of like 6 lessons on produce safety. I also wanted to elevate another really great resource, and that is also located in the Digging Deeper section. And if you can, I don't know if, I'll definitely put this link in after my talk, but if Jenny Lee has ready access to it, that would be awesome to include this in the chat function right now. And this particular resource is developed by the Oklahoma Farm to School program, and they have a lot of, just a ton of great resources on food safety as it specifically relates to school sales. And that's kind of what we're trying to get at, is just lots of food safety resources, but how can we narrow it down into the school piece? And then this final activity is related to it's more of a risk assessment. So this assessment pretty much frames the outline of what a food safety plan would be. And we suggest that after producers fill out this assessment, they can actually share those mitigation strategies with school buyers and show that they've, this is how they're mitigating some of the food safety risks on their farm. So, as we wrap up Module 4, we want to check in with farmers, right? And so we want to see if they, at least if they don't understand what their break-even price is for the product that they're selling to schools, how are they going to, do they have the resources to find what that break-even price point is? And then if they are considering making some changes or scaling up their farm, what is that weak link that's preventing them from being successful at doing that? Understanding how the resources of their production plan for both livestock and crop producers, and then finally understanding what their food safety practices are, what their risks are on their farm, and how they can communicate that with school buyers. I think I mentioned most of the case studies in this particular module that are featured in the actual training slides. But there are a host of other, I would say most of the case studies that we have for this project do incorporate, the longer case studies incorporate a lot of the components that we talk about in module 4. But for more detailed and longer versions, please go to the case studies page. And then since many of the principles of this module are actually generalized to all producers, especially that price point piece, then, you know, we think that the regionalization piece, we didn't include a lot of regionalization prompts for trainers, but we do encourage you to like regionalize through producer profiles and different types of enterprises that will appeal to the producers that you're working with in your state. So kind of breaking it out by enterprise might be a more useful way of differentiating within this particular module. And then finally, that's my contact information, and I'll stop sharing so we can see if there are any questions. Thank you, Jenny Lee, for including that awesome resource. Okay, so Jane is saying something about the produce safety rule on the producer workbook is not accurate. So I'll follow up with you, Jane, on that to see what that's about. Sarah, so there's a need to get corporate compliance to agree on a recipe. And that might be difficult in working with farmers. I'm not sure, Sarah, maybe you should, it's more of a statement, but I'm not, do you want to kind of expand on that?
Jane can help me with this one too. If you want to jump in, because she was the one that actually responded with I'm going to jump on Jane. I'm going to let you take it, Jane.
Okay, yeah, so, well, Sarah, you might have to help me because I'm not sure I remember all the details because you were the one working directly with the food service manager, but they had concerns about needing to see a CN label, which was not required. And then there was another roadblock they were facing too.
Yeah, what was happening is we do a food hub in our community, or we offer through a food hub, and I had added some product on there from a local meat vendor, some beef patties, and she said not only did they need to see a CN label, they also needed to see the fat broken down in each of the separate packages, everything that was separate. And there was quite a few questions about it. But it makes it really complicated when you have a smaller farmer. They don't do that fat content on the whole or in an individual package. They can do it on the whole order, but it's something that really created a lot of havoc down here. The beef patties that they were using were either 2.5 ounces or 4 ounce patties. And heard the farmer themselves was promoting that from Purdue University, there's a microwave method to determine the fat content, but they'd never had it officially tested, and they wanted to see if that was really necessary. Yeah, I think that's, and the big bugger was
Yeah, I
the
think
CN label.
Yeah, the larger point is just that, you know, there are these barriers because schools are used to seeing things a certain way, and with local meat, it may not look that way. The labeling might be different, and you know, the farmer may know that it's legal and the school doesn't know that, and they're not going to take the farmer's word for it. So then you need to pull in a bunch of higher up people who can say that, yeah, it's okay. And that takes a while.
And you have to train your farmer to be able to say, no, that's not appropriate, because that's not a comfortable spot for a farmer to be in. If somebody in a position that you would assume knows what's happening tells you that what they're doing is not right, it's really hard to say, no, wait, you're not the one that's correct there. And so it's really, that's a hard piece. And I, you know, for a farmer to say, I need your help to be able to sell my product to the school is complicated.
Well, yeah, it's great to understand. I think some of those communication tools I don't think are coming through as well in our curriculum, but yeah, that relationship building and communication tools are critical in making sure that some of those issues can be resolved.
Well, and to know which resources to go to is a really important key. Like, how do you determine like who to go to when that kind of thing comes up? So our team handled it and we did great and we pushed back, but I'll tell you, it didn't turn into orders. We resolved the situation, but it didn't turn into orders.
Yeah, and then Annalisa had mentioned that the food service director did a farm visit, and she thinks that maybe an extension person or nonprofit staff might be best trained to do this. But I think the point we were trying to make in that video, or that Common Ground Farm is trying to make, is that actually indeed the food service director did go and visit, because they understood what standards they needed in their kitchen. And I have another example of that being done in Hardin, Montana too. So yeah, it probably just depends on the size of the school and the school district, I think, and their capabilities and understanding of food safety. So yeah, probably just depends. Any other questions related to the content, the enterprise planning, any of the other pieces aside from the food safety, which always brings a robust discussion in our trainings, it seems like. So, but any other questions or concerns or anything, clarifications based on the content of Module 4?
All right, are we ready to get back into it? Can't see, I see some folks have come back. Great. Well, we'll go ahead and jump right back into the conclusion, which is similar to the introduction, a relatively short module. And it's really just intended to support producers as they finish their action plans and answer any remaining questions, and at the very end, conduct the post-training evaluation. So we're going to walk through sort of the pieces of the conclusion, which mostly includes the action planning guide, which you've already looked at a little bit and heard referenced throughout. But to just orient ourselves, we are on page 101 of the Facilitator guide, and to start, and then page 51 in the producer workbook. So like all the other modules, right, this page in the facilitator guide includes that brief overview of the conclusion. It includes the curriculum outline, some background information into digging deeper resources. So in this case, a digging deeper resource into action planning. So notably an action planning guide from Vermont Feed. And it also includes that link to download the slide deck file. And then the conclusion in the producer workbook is extremely brief, as you can see here. It's really, it just simply prompts producers to review the action planning guide checklists and work on developing their action plan. And there's also a link for the producer facing slide deck for them to download as well. So let's just take a moment to look at the curriculum outline for the conclusion. Again, that's on page 101 in the facilitator guide. It includes 3 main sections. So really an overview of the training, an action planning session, and a section for the post-training evaluations. The timing for this section, we estimate 45 to 60 minutes, but it really depends on how much extra time and support producers need in finalizing their action plans. So that can vary a good bit. And then materials needed for the conclusion include the action planning guide, which is again in the producer workbook, just 1 page over, starting on page 52. And a postcard for the final activity, and then the post-training survey materials, which we'll talk about a little bit today, but then we'll hear a lot more about tomorrow during our evaluation training session. So the learning objectives for the conclusion is really just to bring all of this together, to use action planning to help producers identify those motivation goals and next steps, a lot of which they've been doing throughout the training. And again, the conclusion is really just that place to sort of pull all of those pieces together. So like I mentioned, the first section of the training, or the conclusion, excuse me, is to really just kind of go over and do a little bit of a recap if you think it's necessary. So if you look on page 102 of the facilitator guide on slide 5, there are talking points there about sort of a summary for each module, but of course you'd want to adapt that to what content you actually covered in your training, and sort of if you felt like there's a need to dig into anything deeper, this could be an opportunity to review some content there. All right, so the section A, the action planning section, that starts on page 103 of the facilitator guide on slide 6. And this is just, again, an opportunity for producers to spend time looking at their action plan. And so slides 7 and 8, sort of, there's facilitator prompts there to help you sort of guide producers through that action plan. So this is the opportunity for them to make any additional edits, ask questions, and really, if you can build that in, some opportunity for small group and whole group sharing. So producers can kind of compare their action plans and sort of brainstorm together some next steps that they might need to take. And this, again, will just depend, the time that you want to take here just really depends on the size of the group and what level of support producers need. And we encourage you to sort of build in as much time as needed, and really, try to avoid glossing over this section. It's sort of easy to move on after module 4, but make sure that producers really have that sort of circling back, wrap up time with revisiting their action plan. And so part of this process is looking at the summary table, which is on page 61 of the producer workbook. So I mentioned this yesterday when we looked at the action planning guide, but this is really where we're encouraging producers to sort of pull all of those action planning pieces together. And so as you recall, and it's been mentioned throughout today and yesterday, there is that end of module check-in time at the end of each module. And so this is really the opportunity to kind of pull those pieces into one place. So you'll see this table includes a column for producers to identify which market channel, a local school, food hub, or a distributor that they're most interested in pursuing or expanding in following this training. So that's one thing, and Tammy mentioned this, that we're hoping producers sort of get to this place after, particularly after modules 3 and 4, being able to identify which market channel sort of makes the most sense to them. And of course, one of those might be, selling to schools isn't right for me right now. But we do encourage trainers to support producers in picking one of the channels for this activity. And of course, choosing one of them does not preclude any of the others, but you want you really want producers to sort of try to think this process through with at least one of the market channels in mind. And then the next column in this tying it all together table is the values pitch. So, what makes their product different or unique? Why should schools be interested in purchasing from producers? And this pitch may vary depending on the market channel that they choose. And if producers get stuck, you can remind them of the activity that they did in module 3 around this, and encourage them to look back to those benefits of farm to school checklists that they filled out on page 54, which can kind of help with some of those values pieces and how to incorporate that into the pitch that they're sharing with school buyers. And then the next following columns there really include sort of identifying those key resources, next steps, key products, and key partners that are needed to move forward with school sales via whatever market channel that the producer has identified. And again, ideally, a lot of these things have already been identified throughout the training in their action plan, and so they're really just pulling from their table. But if there are still missing gaps, and producers are having trouble identifying their market or feeling like they don't have they can't identify those resources or next steps that they need to take, it is an opportunity to sort of have them revisit certain content areas from the training, or just help them identify additional contacts in their state or region that can support them with these decisions. And I will just say at this moment that we have done a deeper dive into how to support trainers in using action planning. We recorded a training where we go through an example in the action plan table and the tying it all together table. And we also hear from 2 farms, so Fiery Ginger Farm in California, which is a 2-acre produce farm, and Rolling Branch Farms in Georgia, which they sell citrus to schools, and they really explain how they use both informal and formal sort of goal setting processes when they sell to schools. And so I think that's a really valuable additional sort of training opportunity for facilitators to look at and see how this action plan table looks like in action, essentially. So, and it looks like Lacey dropped that recording in the chat, so thanks for that. It's a good one to check out after this training. So the only sort of applied activity, which you can see on slide 10 on page 103, which you'll notice the thumbnail is not accurate on that picture, but it should look like the one you see on the screen right here. And this activity is sort of just one to follow up with after the producers have finalized their action plan sort of for now, right? And we recommend just some sort of activity at the end that kind of celebrates the end of the training and really can support producers with holding themselves accountable and motivated to follow through with their action plans. And so the suggested activity here is for producers to send themselves a postcard that won't arrive until some later date, maybe a year later, depending on their time frame and their action plan that they're working toward. So producers will be asked to address a card to themselves with a goal or vision of where they see themselves in a year or whatever time frame that they're working toward. And as trainers, you can collect those and mail them at a later date. And of course, time permitting, you may want to have producers sort of share their goals with each other. And the instructions for this activity are at the bottom of page 103 on slide 10. But also was curious to hear from folks in the chat if there were other sort of concluding activities like this that you've seen be effective or that you've used when training producers, and welcome those. And again, with a lot of these activities, this is just a suggested one, and welcome folks to adapt as they see necessary there. And then, like I said, the conclusion is pretty short. And so the last section of the conclusion is here. It's the training, evaluation, and follow-up. So this is on page 104 of the Facilitator Guide, slides 11 through 13. And so you're going to walk producers through the post-training evaluation at this point. It's important to note that there are 2 post-training evaluations. So one that occurs at the end of your training, right at the end of your training, and a second one that's sometime in the future, 6 to 12 months after the training. And so the post-training survey link is listed here on slide 12. It's also on page 104 of the Facilitator Guide, as well as in the evaluation protocol guidance that I mentioned earlier, that's adapted for virtual settings. That's located in your workshop materials folder. And that's really all I'm going to say about this right now, just because we're going to get a lot more guidance from Lydia at NYU tomorrow, and she'll be able to answer all of your questions about what does the sort of evaluation process look like, what materials do you need, how you're going to access them, both in person and virtually. So that will all be covered in more detail tomorrow, but just wanted again to note that this is where it's prompting you to do so in the conclusion. So I'm going to pause there. That's, it's a pretty straightforward set of materials with a resource, the action planning guide that I know we've talked about a good bit already over the last few days. Are there any questions with accessing these resources? Oh, I'm sorry. I see I didn't change that slide. This is what the slides look like for the training and evaluation on page 104. Yeah, so if there are any questions about this resource, the application of the guide, how it sort of all fits together with the other modules, I think now's a good time to think about that or talk about that if needed. Great. Yeah, so again, I would just encourage folks to check out that additional recorded training that Lacey dropped in the chat there. It gives, like I said, it walks through, Tammy walks through an example using the action planning guide and the tying it all together tool. And we hear from producers as well on how they use action planning. So that'll give you a lot more context too if you're looking for samples and examples for how to use that tool.
Sure, thanks, Jenny Lee. So that is the curriculum. That is the overview of the curriculum. Hope you got a good sense of how things flow and the content. We know that it still takes a lot of time to dig in there and really get to know it, but we hope you have some familiarity. And so with that, we're going to start diving back into our trainer action planning. You saw some of these slides yesterday in your breakout sessions, and we're going to continue to think about that trainer action planning. So we're going to spend the next about 30 minutes in our breakout groups. And if you are working in your Jamboard and want to refer back to your Jamboards, we're going to be looking at the trainer action planning slides around knowing your content and starting to plan for action. So that's your Jamboards 10 through 12. And then if you have time, you're going to start your planning, your dream training daydreaming. So as your group has time, you're going to start daydreaming about what that ideal training is going to look like for you and your state. So Tomas has had some connectivity issues. So Michigan, you are going to launch in on your own and he will join you when you can. But I have added all the instructions. The Jamboards are pretty self-explanatory, so hopefully that's helpful. But in addition, I've added all those instructions into your participant home base, which Jenny Lee's dropped in there. So if you scroll to the bottom, you can get really detailed instructions on each Jamboard. So you can start to talk your way through those. Are there any questions? We're going to spend 30 minutes. Again, we know folks are moving at different paces, so spend the time in the areas you need to spend time on, and we'll have more time to circle up as a team tomorrow. Yeah, any questions before we break out into our group?
Great. So yeah, we've reached the end of day 3. We've covered a tremendous amount of ground in these last 3 days. So I just want to acknowledge and thank you all for the time that you've been putting into these workshops. Before we conclude today, if you feel so moved, we would love to know if you have a dream location within your state. So if you've thought of that, if that's something that you all have covered in your breakout sessions, yeah, feel inclined to unmute yourself and share, or just share your thoughts through the chat, as well as any other questions or thoughts you want to share with us now.
I'll go. This is Giselle from Iowa. I wouldn't say that we dreamt of a dream location, but we did have good conversation around whether the dream would be to host it in person or online. And I feel like going off of the pandemic, a lot of people are trying to figure out, how do you get the best attendance and what's the best way to connect and convey information. So our dream location may be the internet, but we're not sure yet.
Great, thank you.
This is Helen from Minnesota Department of Ag. I'll just say we're working through some tensions of where in the state there's, like the concentration of the metro or metro approximate resources versus really, really rural with a much different producer landscape, and how to honor the needs and assets of each community and where they're at with farm to school, and that's really different. So it's we're still figuring out what it means to do this as a state. Plus also maybe partner with our friends in Wisconsin friends.
I can speak for Michigan and maybe others can add, but one of the things we talked, same thing, would you do live? Would you do it Zoom? One of the things we did talk about are the many different conferences. So we have a small farms conference. MIFS does a wonderful conference. We have Glexpo, which brings in many farmers, which is a Great Lakes Expo. So it would be probably in different areas of the state, probably more north and northeast, but northwest, but it brings in the option of people attending a conference, at least for a kickoff live component of this training. And then we talked about possibly developing modules that people could follow up with.
Great. Well, thank you for sharing. Yeah, that concludes our day 3 today. We'll be back at tomorrow, 12:30 p.m. Central Time, for our final day. So yeah, if there's not anything else anyone would like to share right now, we'll conclude it for today.